Hey, it's Unit 4, Energy and Living Things. This is 4.2, Light-Dependent Reactions. This is kind of complicated. I'm not really gonna try to make this easy. And so just make sure you take it slow. Encourage you to look closely at the pictures there. If you just search light-dependent reaction, you can find these same pictures. There's nothing like secret about them. I'm just taking someone else's art and using it to teach students. And so if you want to find it, look closely at it, go and kind of what I'm saying, make sure you can see it there and discover it for yourself. That's really important, like for you to be able to make those connections. So let's talk about light-dependent reaction real. First of all, remember two reactions, light-dependent reaction, Calvin cycle. We're going to be talking about the left side of this picture, light-dependent reactions. Notice H2O is necessary for this portion of the reaction. So is light. That's why it's called light-dependent. Oxygen is going to be given off here. And there's a couple other things that's made, ATP and NADPH. Let's talk about a couple other things. First, let's talk about the chloroplast. You might see a picture of a chloroplast on the test. The chloroplast is going to have two things labeled. First of all, what is the chloroplast? It's an organelle found in plant cells, that site of photosynthesis. A couple other things that's interesting about the chloroplast: it has its own DNA, has its own ribosomes, has a double membrane like you see here. And it's got these little things inside it called thylakoids. They look like Mentos. They're not. They're thylakoids. Thylakoid is the site of the light-dependent reaction. And the stroma is the space inside the chloroplast. That's the only two things you need to label. But you might see a picture of a chloroplast on the test and be like, what is A? And it'll be pointing to like the thylakoid. The only other option would be stroma. Who knows what the other two things will say, but they're both going to be wrong. Moving on, chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the primary pigment found in plants. What is it? What is a pigment? Pigment is a light-absorbing molecule. Chlorophyll, again, is the primary pigment. Notice what's going on with chlorophyll. It is absorbing light because pigments absorb light. It's not absorbing every light, though. It's reflecting green. And that's why we see green. So chlorophyll is a green pigment. It's reflecting that so we can use it. The rest of the light is absorbed. And when plants absorb that, it allows them to absorb the sun's energy. There are groups of these pigments found on the thylakoid membrane called photosystems. We're going to be looking at two different photosystems, photosystem 1, photosystem 2, except we're going to be looking at them in opposite order. And so when that light is absorbed by chlorophyll, then what that causes the electrons in chlorophyll to do is to kind of get super excited, and chlorophyll is unable to hold on to them, and it's going to lose two of those electrons. There's a magnesium involved and some other stuff going on here, but we're not getting into that. It's too deep in the weeds for us. We're just going to know that chlorophyll is a light-absorbing molecule called a pigment, and that pigment loses two electrons when it's hit by the sun because it gets too excited. Just can't hang on to them anymore. Light-dependent reaction. Let's talk about this. There's a series of steps here. You know me, I don't like to really number the steps. I have a certain number on my sheet, but as soon as I give you a number, you're going to be like, well, what was step 4? Because I would rather you understand the whole process rather than being concerned about having your numbers right and all that stuff, because that's dumb. So we're going to talk about light-dependent reaction. Again, this is where the main goal behind the light-dependent reaction is to make ATP and NADPH. And there's some things that are going to happen along the way. Water is going to be split up, and oxygen is going to be given off as a byproduct. And so we're going to be looking out for those things, right? Those are the important things that's going on. So let's look at part 1 of this one. So all the way there on the left, there's PS2, and that stands for photosystem 2. Remember, photosystems are groups of pigments, primary pigments, chlorophyll. Chlorophyll gets excited, loses its electrons, right? So that's exactly what happens. When chlorophyll is hit by the light, it loses those electrons. You can see the arrows, right? They're just kind of traveling. And it only has 2, right? So once it gets hit by that light, it's going to lose those 2 electrons. Those 2 electrons are going to go down that little path. You see the little purple dots here. See if I can get my cursor. I actually can't get my cursor. Maybe I can. Yeah, you see this little path right here. This is called the Electron Transport Chain, or the ETC. We'll talk about the ETC a little bit in photosynthesis, but we're going to talk about it a lot more in cellular respiration. And so those electrons are going to go down the ETC, and they're going to head toward photosystem 1. And so that we're going to leave them there for just a moment, right? Chlorophyll doesn't have any extra electrons. And so in order for this reaction to continue, we need a steady supply of electrons. That is the purpose of water. Water is going to be split there, and you can see it. You see down there H2O is down here. H2O, it comes in and it gets tore up, right? There's some oxygen, some H pluses, those are hydrogen ions, and some electrons. And so this splitting up of water, first of all, supplies a steady supply of electrons. And so those electrons that we lost that we thought we weren't going to be able to replace, water is there replacing them. It does something else. This is where oxygen is given off. Remember, that was one of the things we were looking for. We found it. Here it is. Oxygen is being given off at this step. And there's some protons or some hydrogen ions. I'm going to say protons from here on out, but understand that that H plus is a hydrogen ion, and it is the same thing as a proton. Everybody's with me? Okay, so there we are. Water supplying a steady stream of electrons. So we've got those electrons moving through the ETC. These little purple beans right here, we're going to call them the ETC. Well, that's their name. They actually have other names. We're going to call them the ETC. And so they're traveling through here. As they're traveling through here, what they're doing is those electrons are kind of transferring their energy. They have a lot of energy because the sun just got them all excited. And that energy is going to allow the building up inside the thylakoid of a concentration gradient. Remember that from the last units, where we have a high concentration of something on one side of the membrane and a low concentration of something on the other side. In this case, that something is protons. So this is a proton gradient. We have a high concentration of protons inside the thylakoid and a low concentration of protons outside the thylakoid. This is an example of active transport. There's a concentration gradient being built up in order to do cellular work. We're getting ready to see what that work is getting ready to be done. Let's trace those electrons to their final destination. And so there they go. They're tired. They pumped all those protons, and they're going to get excited by the sun one more time on PS1 or photosystem 1. And from there, they're going to get scooped up by NADP+. NADP+ is an electron carrier, and when it scoops up those electrons, it becomes NADPH. And NADPH is headed off to the Calvin cycle to do amazing things. Right, so that's what it's going to do. It's going to the Calvin cycle. We'll talk more about that in 4.3. And so that is it for those electrons. We will stay with them actually for the rest of this unit. We're going to be talking about those electrons. Pretty important. So what are we going to do with this concentration gradient? We said it could do some kind of cellular work. What kind of cellular work can it do? Well, let's talk about it. Here it is. You got the proton gradient building up down here inside the thylakoid. And you got more protons down here than you have outside, and so they're going to want to move from an area of high concentration to low concentration, and they're going to use this protein, this weird-looking thing here. It's called ATP synthase. That sounds like something, right? First of all, ASE, it's an enzyme, right? And then it sounds like synthesis. We know what synthesis means. It means to make something. What's it making? It tells us ATP synthase. It's making ATP. And so the diffusion of these protons across the thylakoid membrane is going to provide the energy to convert ADP, which is 2 phosphates, into ATP, which is 3 phosphates, cell's energy currency. That ATP is headed off to the Calvin cycle to do amazing things. And so that is the light-dependent reaction. So just summing it all up, what goes in? Well, water goes in, right? Water's going in down here, split, supplies a steady stream of electrons. NADP plus is going in, right? And it's going in to scoop up some electrons. ADP is going in. It's going to be converted into something else. What comes out? Oxygen comes out. It is a byproduct of this reaction. NADPH comes out. It's going to the Calvin cycle. And ATP comes out. It is also going to the Calvin cycle. And it is light that is making all this possible. If you need to watch it again, do it. Get this picture. I think this picture's fantastic, actually. Sums everything up nicely, but it's simple enough to understand, but it's complex enough to get everything in there. Hopefully this was helpful.